Hey guys, welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, the podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hey, little helpers. Today we have a different topic, one that I had actually never heard of until a follower of ours suggested it. It's called the drama triangle. And this really kind of blends in well, I think, with what we talk about with a lot of like personality disorder behavior and interpersonal relationships. So I'm going to kick it over to Kibby to tell us what the drama triangle is and tell us how Cool of Mine can help.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic because it's something that I learned in family systems therapy first. So, the idea, in the very simplest form, is that when you have a family or close relationships with someone with mental illness that's dysfunctional, often there are three major roles. One is the victim, the person who's hurt, the person who feels helpless, and the one person who wants help. You have the perpetrator, the person who is causing the pain, who has more power and control. And then the third is the rescuer, someone who rushes in to fix it, to save the victim from the perpetrator and try to, you know, fix the whole situation. So, as we're talking about these different roles, what we're really talking about is getting stuck in this toxic dynamic of someone always needing rescuing and someone always fixing and someone always like hurting that really maintains mental health problems in a family and really maintains like toxic dynamics. So if you have noticed that when we're describing these roles, if you notice that this is something that you relate to, like you find that you're always trying to help your loved one who has mental illness and sometimes feeling like you're the bad guy for it or things like that, then this is the kind of stuff that Cool of Mind is made to help you with. So again, Cool of Mind is our online platform and community that will walk you through all the different strategies we talk about for supporting a loved one with mental illness and really supporting yourself. So we teach you how to break toxic patterns, set boundaries, respond calmly when things get hard, and to really support yourself and find your own peace. So, if you're interested, and it's really working with me one on one, and I only have a few more slots open, so I'm just, if you're interested, check out coolamind.com, KULAMIND.com, and click on Get Started. The link is also in the show notes, so you could check it out there. So you could just book a free call with me and just chat about what you're going through, and we could talk about how I can help.
I think what's important about the drama triangle to understand is that these roles can shift. So you may go from being the rescuer, where you're always kind of trying to solve the other person's problems, you're always trying to change their behavior or like figure it out. But then if that person doesn't accept your help or doesn't like take your advice basically, then you might switch into the persecutor role where it's like, well, screw you then, like clearly all this is on you, these are all your problems, I tried to help, I can't help. And the victim can also kind of go from like, I think the difference between the victim and the persecutor is like the persecutor tends to blame other people for all of their problems. Um, and they're very harsh and kind of critical. And the victim is likely to blame themselves more,
Mm.
and basically say, I'm worthless, I can't do anything right, etc. But what can happen sometimes is that, like, the victim can kind of elicit help from a rescuer, but when that rescuer gets fed up or when they're still not better, then they can turn into the persecutor where they're like, nobody wants to help me, nobody cares, everyone else is terrible, yada, yada, yada. So these
Mhm.
roles are dynamic.
Yeah, I find that's the most interesting part. I love how it's weird because when our listener introduced this topic to us, um, she gave us an article, which I'll link in the show notes too, that talks about how the roots of this drama triangle, it's called Karpman drama triangle, is from analyzing fairy tales.
Hmm.
And I was like, wait, what? Like, and then reading about it, it's like, oh yeah, drama starts, it's like the stories in fairy tales, like the drama starts with um having these three roles, right? It's like someone needs help, and then another person is causing the problem, and then there's someone who's rescuing, right? If you think about like Sleeping Beauty
Hmm.
or Cinderella, like there's always like some kind of dynamic where there's someone that's helpless, and wants something, and then there's forces that are helping them towards it and getting in the way, right? Like there's the villain, and then the protagonist, and then the hero, right? There's all these
Hmm.
different kinds of roles. And this idea of the drama triangle was proposed by Dr. Stephen Karpman in 1968. He was a psychiatrist, and this is something from transactional analysis, which I'm not familiar with, but it's really trying to understand the patterns of unhealthy relationships. And in family systems therapy, they also talk about triangulation, right? Having like three. And the common one that is seen is like the two parents and then the third kid, or
Hmm.
like two siblings and a parent, where the common dynamic is tell your father that I'm not talking to him and I want him to help me out. Well, tell your mother that I'm sick of this, right? Like putting
Hmm.
kids in the middle or putting someone in the middle. And it could be really subtle. Like it's not always so clear. It's not as dramatic as like a Sleeping Beauty situation. um, but it sometimes there there are these roles, like there's someone who's the mediator in the family, right? There's someone who's the problem child, and then there's the other one who's like the narcissistic oppressive parent who's causing all the issues, right? So there's always like these subtle roles that people fall into when these dysfunctional dynamics, and they do shift. I think that's the coolest part. It's not like you're just the victim all the time, which I think that some people do like fall into those roles more often, but you can change. You could flip to the different roles. I think that was so interesting.
I okay. I'm not super familiar with this topic. I'm learning about it today, and therefore maybe some of my confusion is because I don't know enough. But part of this feels obvious, like, and I can't figure out how you're supposed to get out of it. Like, it's obvious to me that
Hmm.
some people are going to want to help people some of the time,
Yeah.
and it's obvious to me that some people are going to feel victimized some of the time. And it's obvious to me that some people are going to be critical and fed up some of the time. And it's like, are those roles really? Or is there a problem to that? Like, is there any way out of it? Or are we just sort of describing like, I don't know, what it's like to be a person? I don't know. There's something that I'm missing here.
Yeah. Yeah. Because these are such obvious roles in any problem. Like
Right.
someone gets hurt, someone does the hurting, and then there's someone who fixes it.
Right.
Um, I think this is something that's brought up in systems therapy, family systems therapy, and I'm just learning about this too. But I really love it's so applicable to all the things that we talk about. Where the idea is that isn't we're not looking at one person as the problem, or one
Hmm.
person has an illness, but the illness is in the system. And in a system of a family, it's almost kind of like there's this structure, there's this dynamic that it has to maintain itself, and all of these people are play a role in it, right? They're kind of like a cog in the machine.
Hmm.
And sometimes people are so like what's the most important about that for the family is that they want to maintain stability, right? And they almost choose it over making a change, even if it's good, because stability keeps the family alive and keeps it together. So the so of course, yeah, there's like everyone gets hurt about it, but this is the drama triangle is in a situation where there's always drama and conflict happening that doesn't get resolved, right?
Hmm.
It's like a self-sustaining system that is constantly like doing its thing. And when it gets dysfunctional is that when people like switch around, and people tend to switch these roles because this is not working. This is not ultimately satisfying your need, right? It's, for example, like as you said, if the rescuer really wants to rescue and help and fix a person who's sick, or who's the one who's helpless, then they get exhausted, and they feel hurt and they feel tired. So that because of that, they flip into the victim. Like how many times have I been in a situation like this is like almost like caregiver burnout, right? Where you're like helping, 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 And then you're like, this is not working. That person is still staying stuck. I'm still staying stuck. Fine, I'm done.
That's more the persecutor.
And well, no, you're trying to help them,
Yeah, you're trying to help
right?
them, but then you get burnt out and you say, fine, I'm done. Like, this is unfixable. But the victim
Right,
would say,
right.
like, there's something wrong with me.
Right. Well, it depends on what happens, right? And
Right. Yeah.
how that person, if I'm like, let's say the fixer, rescuer, I'm trying to fix, and then I get so tired of it and it isn't working.
Hmm.
It depends on where I want to flip to, right? That's not always clear. I could flip to the victim where I'm like, this is so hard for me. Can't you see how hard it is for me? I'm helpless and I'm burnt out and depressed.
Hmm.
Or you become the perpetrator where you're like, no, you got to do this now. I'm just taking you to, I'm going to, fine. And then you get aggressive, right? So it depends, and then cause more hurt yourself.
Or
So,
just be like, okay, you're unhelpable. Like there's you don't want to be helped, fine. Like that's a problem that you have in your personality. Like I just did this with my friend, right? Like I flipped from the rescuer to the persecutor, which
mhm,
I have no interest in actually persecuting her, but just in my own mind, I'm like highly critical of her because I
mhm,
got burnt out on helping. But I'm not sitting here thinking like I'm incapable of helping people. But I mean I understand that other people could. They'd be like, oh, something's wrong with me if I can't fix this. And I feel
right.
like we could do that as therapists, like when it feels like our job to rescue and then we're not able to rescue, and then it's like, oh, I'm not a good therapist. There's something wrong with me.
Mhm. Or you go like, oh, I'm like, I've seen actually in that dynamic you're talking about, I've seen you flip to the victim role where you're like, that really hurts me. And I'm like, you bring attention to your hurt, right? And then not fully into the victim, but you talk about your hurt versus like, fine, get away, and then you become the perpetrator of like, I'm the one who abandons. But the difference with you and your dynamic is that it didn't maintain, right? You broke
Yeah.
out of it.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm kind of like, yeah, like when you try to do something and it doesn't work, you're like, of course you're gonna feel bad and then feel bad for yourself and want other people to listen to you. Like, is that dysfunctional? I guess part of me is like, this makes just normal human behavior seem dysfunctional. Like I don't know who wouldn't be in these roles at any given time in life. Like
Right.
it,
Right.
it seems like if
It's
I'm like,
not right. It's not saying that if you're a victim and someone else is a perpetrator, then you're stuck in this triangle for all of time. It's a triangle for a
mhm,
reason. It's not like someone's hurting you and then you're done. You resolve it. It's a triangle that's maintained the dysfunction and it spins around in its own toxic cycle. It's a cyclical thing.
okay,
So an example would be I think I think actually I'm at fault at this. I've been in this a lot. I think this feels a little bit more natural to me because
hmm,
because me being a child of divorce, I definitely felt like in a triangle. I definitely felt like there was some system between me and my two parents that was maintaining dysfunction, right? It
hmm,
felt productive because, someone was hurt and we were yelling at each other and blah, blah, blah. But there was always like this, we were like glued together with this drama. And the drama was always was always kicked off by someone being super hurt, someone being the quote, the person who hurt, and the other one was trying to fix it.
hmm,
Um, and and I definitely in that space felt like sometimes I was the victim of my mom's my mom's stuff,
hmm,
the fights and stuff, and then I was running to my dad for help, and my dad would call my mom, being like, "How could you do this to our daughter? Stop
hmm,
it!" Blah blah blah, and then she would get hurt by my dad saying things, and so she'd be like, "Oh, I'm so hurt because what he did," and then I would actually have to go back to her to make her feel better because of
yeah,
the hurt that she got from my dad, right?
hmm,
So it wasn't like, okay, we all talked this out and we figured it out and we're going to move forward. And it was a triangulation of everyone playing a part of
hmm.
maintaining a pain
Okay, that's
by
helpful.
and what's interesting is why they shift is because it doesn't what this triangle doesn't do is meet emotional needs in the long run. It
Hmm.
doesn't help you grow. but also the shift shifts away from a painful reality. So it's almost kind of like a weird avoidance strategy to shift into the different roles. And I'm still trying to digest what that means, but it's basically like if the role isn't working, they shift to another part to kind of like step out of
Well,
that
yeah, I mean,
unmet need.
if you imagine somebody who's narcissistic, then they are likely to be a persecutor much of the time. They're likely to be highly critical, feel entitled, think that every problem in their life is somebody else's fault, right? Because they can't look inward.
Hmm.
To then as soon as like narcissistic injury happens, so somebody criticizes them, then they flip hard into the victim role.
Hmm.
Um, I can't do anything right. How can I can't feel this way. Da, 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 da. But then also kind of it seems like waffling between persecutor and victim. I mean, I think that's kind of partly what confuses me is that both the persecutor and the victim seem like victims to me.
What do you mean?
Well, the persecutor saying everything is somebody else's problem, but that's kind of like saying my problems are somebody else's problems. But the
Uh-huh.
victim says my problems are my own problems. But both of those two characters seem like victims to me. You're either a victim of your own shit or you're a victim of somebody else's shit, but you're still a victim.
Yeah. Let's th- problems and pain, probably all three will have it.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'm seeing this as like who has power,
Mm-hmm.
right? Perpetrator is the one who has power and is trying to
Mm-hmm.
fix problems and their pain through power and control over the victim. The victim feels like they're powerless. It's kind of like when we talk about this in with people with borderline personality disorder, how they can flip from active passivity to, um, being like the competent one, or it's like,
Mm-hmm.
do they have power and control and they're doing things, or are they helpless and hopeless and you need to help me? Same with in narcissistic personality disorder, they flip from grandiose, I can do everything, to the vulnerable, I'm
Mm-hmm.
nothing and everyone hates me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have that flip, but then you have a third person who's like mediating and dealing and helping them with trying to get out of this, but really they're not. Maybe they're
It
just
doesn't have
maintaining
to be a
it.
third person though. Like what I was reading is that you can have this with two people. It's just that your roles will flip between the three.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
You were going to analyze my ex.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what did you
Yeah.
say
So
about him?
there's a really sad comfort that I have in like being a third party, right? It's like this feeling that I've had in couples therapy when I was doing couples therapy, or with friends who are fighting. It's like you feel comfortable being the mediator, but there's something really familiar and comforting with it. So for example, in your last relationship, when you two were having a fight,
You were the rescuer.
yeah, sometimes, right? Like one of you would be like, oh, talk to that person, right? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
not listening. And the problem was that you two weren't listening to each other's like you two had a conflict, right? In yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you two should have broken up, right? And did break up.
That is
But
a conflict.
right, like there was like issues in the relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you would pull me in or someone else to try to like translate, to try to listen to one
Right.
and try to talk to the other person, right? And I, I actually said this to I think I forgot who I said this to, but I remember saying, I, I think your ex's like thoughts and feelings were sometimes so aggressive and like hostile that
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, fine, let me let him vent that to me so
Yeah.
I can absorb that first bit of anger so that he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say that stuff to her.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I would have like hour-long conversations where he would just like spew vitriol at me. And then I would like try to validate or try to be like, try to do all my things to try to get him around it. And then eventually I would soften him up and I'll be like, okay, great. Then he could go and talk to her now because
Mm-hmm.
maybe he's in a more open position. Um, and I guess that works sometimes. I don't know. But like, it worked enough, but it was dysfunctional because what I was trying to do is absorb the badness
Right.
so that, but then like that doesn't really work in the long term. That doesn't actually fix what's going on between you. It's a band-aid, right?
Right. Well, it hurts you in the long run, and it also prevents me from getting the full scale of the information that would have allowed me to leave him, theoretically.
Yeah. Like the time that I flipped into perpetrator was when he went on a rant about how he thought you were narcissistic or like all the bad things. And he was
Mm,
just like, "Ugh, ugh." And I was like, yeah, she definitely has those qualities. Sometimes she could be narcissistic. Yeah, yep. And then, yeah, she's worried about her looks or blah, blah, I don't know. And then
mm.
he went to you
And
and was
said,
like,
Gibby thinks you're a
Kibby
narcissist.
said you're a narcissist.
Yeah.
Right? And suddenly I'm the perpetrator.
Hmm.
Right? And so I was like, fuck. Like I was like, I know better. I know these roles switch, and that's the key part for everyone listening to this. If you think that you're just gonna be the victim or the rescuer, nah, sometimes you switch to the other ones. And then I've also been the victim. Like when I was trying to mediate with him and then he got mad and then flipped into attacking me or threatening me, I was the victim and I was like, I can't do this. I'm helpless. Oh my
Hmm.
God. Right. So,
Yeah. And
and then I was turning
then,
to you for support. Right. So sometimes it's just like, it's basically pain that's being tossed around between three people. And
hmm.
really what needed to happen was that you two needed to, like, I needed to step out. You needed no mediators. You just needed to like be with each other and be like, let's work out whatever this is, whatever this
Hmm.
pain is between us. Like, let's work it
Yeah.
out
I think
together.
so with BPD, what I was reading is that like what can often happen is they start out as a rescuer, which I'm sure, I mean, they can also start out as a victim, but whatever. But it can be common to start out as a rescuer because they'll see other people who are in distress and remind them like of themselves, for instance.
Mm.
So like I just watched this play out with my sister and her ex, I hope to God forever ex, where, they met in rehab. And whenever my sister goes to rehab, she always like highly identifies with the men there. And she always tries to rescue. Because it's a good place for her, right? Because normally she feels disempowered, and kind of like a victim to alcohol and other stuff. So with him, it's like she rescued him and, gave him her time and her energy and her sympathy. And then, when she would want space or something else for her future, like he would switch heavily into the persecutor role, and then she would flip into the victim role
Hmm.
and just be like, oh my, like, I guess I have to accept any amount of treatment from him because, I lied or I'm messed up or, whatever the
Yeah.
case may be. And then he would do something so egregious that then she might become the persecutor for like half a second and then would kind of flip back into the victim role again.
Hmm.
And it's just like on and on and on. And then he would do this all the time, right? He'd be like, "You are a terrible, lying, alcoholic slut, and you just cheat on me," which the story is way more complicated than that. And so, therefore, I'm going to hire private investigators to come spy on you, and I'm going to stalk you, and I'm going to, hurt you. And I deserve to do that because you keep throwing away my love. How dare you? And so it was that kind of, I think that's the thing is it's like a victim stance that allows him to then perpetrate.
Mm. Mm. That's interesting. I think that's an interesting wrinkle about how victimhood can be weaponized to actually
Mhm.
perpetrate, right? So even the drama triangle might have broken down now and collapsed and be like, you know, you can be a perpetrator and hurt someone by being the rescuer, or
Mhm.
and perpetrate from victimhood. So wow, this is okay. Way more complex. Way more complex than I thought.
Well, this was my ex too, like always flipping between persecution and victimhood. And then, then what can happen is then she feels really bad. or I felt really bad with my ex, right? And then they flip into the rescuer.
Hmm.
Oh, it's okay. I'm here for you. I love you still.
Hmm.
Like, I'm sorry I did that, but like, let's not kiss your boo boo, make it better,
Hmm.
etc.
That's
So,
yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think that might just highlight that what happens with the shifts. The shifts force the other ones maybe into other roles too, right? Like
hmm
we talk about this with gaslighting and Darvo, and I've seen them like your relationship where he'll say something to hurt you, you'll be upset, and then he'll go into the childlike victim role and
hmm
be like, "Oh, it's because I can't. I'm so bad." And then it would pull reassurance and sympathy and caring from you,
right.
right? So it just like it forces the other person into the other roles that to see what happens and to try to get needs met by like flipping around.
Right, right. I guess part of me though is like, okay, how do we get out of it? Like, if somebody's in distress, I'm gonna find it pretty hard not to make them feel better, and that's not always a bad. I mean, that's usually a good thing, right? It's just in these dysfunctional systems where something else is needed.
Yeah, I'm also wondering how does well, now the answer to the question is coming in my head, but I was thinking like, how does this not happen all the time in couples therapy? Because
hmm
you're literally introducing a third person who's the
hmm
rescuer, right?
hmm
And well, commonly people don't like couples therapy because they're like, the therapist was against me. So suddenly, like,
Yeah.
the therapist would go from you know, the rescuer to the perpetrator, and then sometimes they become the victim when the couple or someone like starts yelling and be like, "How could you, you're a bad therapist. How could you do that?" Right? So it's like couples therapy almost introduces
Yeah.
this drama triangle. But the, I mean, I think the similarly with what we've been always talking about, which is getting stuck, is
hmm
basically like how do we get unstuck? And I think that for the drama triangle, family therapists will say, okay, this is a system that's maintaining itself and it's a dysfunctional system. All families have a system and a structure that maintains itself. Okay. So it's not like three people are always going to be dysfunctional, but
hmm
when there's drama and conflict and pain being passed around without it being resolved, it's almost like
hmm
they're bonding over the misery, right? And how do we relate to that misery? So it really is about breaking up the triangle that gets the change, right? I'm sure you
Okay.
could change it in multiple ways. You could change a system by changing one of the cogs in the machine, but it's
hmm
really like family therapists would break up the triangle. And what that looks like is, so in one of the family therapy trainings I went to, she said, okay, the triangulation often happens in families where the parents or siblings or whatever, and then there's like let's say two parents are fighting, they're dysfunctional, and then they have a kid. Um, and the kid is the mediator, the go-between. Tell your father, tell your
hmm
mother, I'm not gonna, right? What happens a lot in that kind of system is like often the kid gets really anxious because that kid is absorbing and involved in a triangle of the parents' pain in their own marriage, right? So they're not getting their needs met as a kid. They're like living in and being raised in their dysfunction as a couple.
hmm
So what you do is you break up the triangle. You get the kid out of there. You kick the kid out and say, "Parents, you're going to sit and talk about your problems." And then a good family therapist will not take over that role of rescuer, but just like continually hand it back to them and say, I'm not going to rescue you. I'm not going to rescue anyone. Okay. Because the triangle, if you think about it as like a control thing, is like one person has all the power, one has not as much power. And then there's a third person trying to mediate the power, right? Dynamic. But it's like, no, 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 no. It's, we're not going to polarize it. Everyone has power here.
hmm
One person feels hurt, but maybe all of you feel hurt, but you all have to rescue yourself.
Okay.
So collapse the triangle into a dyad. Like just actually try have people talk about things directly. No, tell your mom this, tell your mom that. No, the parents have to talk to each other about their pain.
Hmm.
And that's really hard because A, you're breaking up a system. B, you're like, there's nothing to soften, there's nothing to mediate. It's just open yourself up to the pain of what's actually in between you two,
Okay, and
right?
what if it's just two people that are role switching? Like there's no third mediator. There's no.
I mean, then it's all the stuff we talk about in couples therapy and communication. It's about both parties taking accountability. It's about
Hmm.
both parties um, describing their experience and listening to the other person's experience, and then finding a mid ground that satisfies both of their needs. You know,
Okay. Do you feel like you've got to be mostly a rescuer in life, right? You feel?
I identify as a rescuer, but I often probably I identify as a you know what? Actually, now that I think about it, growing up, I felt like the perpetrator.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and there's other words for it. There's other, like scapegoat, I think.
Hmm. Yeah,
Was
we
that
talked about
victim?
that.
Yeah. I thought of myself as the problem and like
Hmm.
causing a lot of the problems, but kind of like reacting to everything. And then I grew up and I was like, I want to shift out of this. I'm going to be a rescuer. So
Hmm.
I um, became a therapist and like focus on helping people. But
Hmm.
then I only recently realized how much I probably have been a victim too. I really, I really undervalue my experiences as a victim. And I think like we've talked about this where ever since like healing from cancer, I was like, oh my God, like the amount of abuse that I had, like
Hmm.
I always thought about like, oh, I'm the problem. I was a problem. I did like
Hmm.
life was chaotic, and I recognized that like my parents' pain and mental illness and addiction like definitely affected me, but I didn't really see myself as a victim
Yeah.
until recently. And I was like, oh, this is all making sense because a lot of my symptoms and the way I look at myself and how much like how much I'm like how much I do things to prevent disaster and feel like bad about myself all the time and like constantly feel like I can't rest because I have to prove myself is like
Hmm.
from times where I've been a victim.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think I've only recently realized how much I should
It
have
seems like
probably
that
taken the
slowed down your persecutor side. Like
to be a victim.
you seem less critical, yeah, like more like calmer, um, sweeter. I don't know. I don't know if that's from recognizing that like you've been mistreated.
Yeah, I think the perpetrator feels a little bit more comfortable because it feels like I have control and
Hmm.
power, right? Like with my ex, it was so confusing because I strongly identified as a victim and rescuer. And right, like he was like, oh, I can't possibly live normal life. I have to just smoke weed in your basement and not really engage. And
Also,
I
he
would
was the
be like,
victim. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, he was a victim. And I was like, oh, sorry, yeah, he identified as a victim. And I would
Hmm.
eventually get so like worried and overwhelmed and confused why like he wasn't working or doing it that I would be like, what the fuck is going on? Like why aren't you doing anything? And then he would collapse into like, oh, you're yelling at me. And then I would feel so guilty, right? So
Hmm.
I was like, oh my God, like I'm and he would say this, like I'm pressuring him, I'm oppressing him, I'm the one with all the power, and I'm like yelling at him for not doing anything and making him feel bad about himself. But at the same time, I felt helpless and
Hmm.
powerless. Um, Especially because I had to end up like supporting him in so many ways that I didn't agree to, and like agreeing to a lot of like my boundaries were constantly violated all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
So I
feeding
was
him
like,
sandwiches with your
yeah,
ex. Hand feeding him sandwiches was
Yeah.
my personal favorite anecdote.
But like, look how weird it was. I mean, the stories for people who have no idea what we're talking about. Oh my gosh, I hope he's
Kimmy
not
had to
listening.
hand feed him sandwiches because he would get too hungry to pick up his own hands and
He
feed
was,
them to
yeah, he
himself.
was like a 30 something year old doctor who would, I would be like, are you gonna be hungry? Should I get dinner? And he'd be like, no, I'm not hungry. And I'm like, you're gonna be hungry in like an hour. You're like, no, it's fine. And then he would get so hungry that he would just collapse
Hmm.
onto the couch and be like, "Oh, okay, give me a second. I'll get up and get some food. I can't even." Oh. And so I would bring him food and feed it to him so he could
Rescuer
get up.
role. Uh-huh.
Real rescue. I mean, it was real. It
Hmm.
was real infantilizing. Like I had a baby. I honestly, my baby is a lot more like go get him than my ex-husband was. But it made me feel like I had so much power and he was so helpless. And I was like, and so when I felt hurt or confused or whatever, it was really confusing because I was like, but I have all this power and control, and I'm the one who's determining everything, and I'm the
Hmm.
go-getter alpha, whatever. But it didn't feel that way. So it was like really, really confusing.
Yeah.
And so me being in the persecutor role feels comfortable because I'm like, yeah, I have agency. But then I was like, do I?
Well, that feels like the more normal role for the parent to be in is the flip between rescuer and persecutor. Not, ideally you spend more time in the rescuer role if it's your child, but like that's discipline, right? It's like, I'm going to discipline you now. It gets pretty weird when parents are victims and then their child has to be parentified.
Mhm.
But yeah, so you were flipping between rescue and persecutor.
Yeah. Yeah. I really didn't want to be the rescuer a lot, but I had to. Yeah. Now that I think about it, my mom would collapse and, be, need physical help, like going to the hospital or like be hurt that I left
Mm-hmm.
slash was kicked out my house. And she would call me, like, how could you leave me? So I'd have to come back because I would feel so bad about hurting her by leaving.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So these are, it really interesting. Okay. Like piecing this together as we talk about it. It's really a system that is maintained by the idea that there is a imbalance of power, and who seems to wield it to cause the pain, right?
Hmm.
I mean, even if even in the origin stories of the fairy tales, like Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, my goodness, like what an obvious difference in power that's set up from the beginning, right? Like Cinderella was I don't know, like a princess or aristocrat or whatever she was, and then the evil stepmother takes over and takes away literally all her power to make her, you
Yeah.
know, like a maid. So if it was just like two equal women battling it out and some magic mirror doing all, and the fairy godmother coming in to rescue no one, like it's not the same as like, oh, there's someone has all the power and we got to rescue the one with no power because that's not fair, we got to fight for justice, right? There's almost like this third force that has to come in to make it right.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's important to note like the victim role is somebody who is sort of like feels chronically helpless, incapable of change, powerless, ashamed often, but they're not actually a victim of circumstance. So I don't think that you would, so like Cinderella was a victim of circumstance. So that's why we like her and don't see her as like the victim role in this, even though yes, that's the fairy tale kind of role that he's noticing. Um, but it's like it's a stance that one takes. Um,
I they're interesting
I mean that's just what this article is saying.
that there actually isn't a real power differential. I mean, I can imagine that when you deal with families, there is a power difference, right? Like there's often like the
Yeah.
father or someone else who's stronger, right? Who has more financial means or physical strength. And then the other one who's more like helpless and scared. And then the kid who's trying to save his mom from the abuse, right? So that's an example of like real power differential. But then,
Yeah. I don't, I guess maybe the point, I mean, this says this is not an actual victim of circumstance, but someone who acts or feels like one, denying their ability to take responsibility or make decisions.
mm,
I'm guessing they're making that distinction because if you are in a dysfunctional situation because you are quite literally the victim, like you are being beaten on, you yourself are not maintaining the dysfunction.
mhm,
Like you don't have a choice. That's not, that has nothing to do with your personality necessarily. Now, I mean, obviously, like one hopes that you would leave, but what maintains the dysfunction is your taking of that stance,
mm,
sort of voluntarily
mm.
or I mean, subconsciously, but
Maybe that's why the roles can shift because people actually
yeah.
you could trade the power a little bit more easily versus situations that are very clear cut, like this is a boss and this is an employee and one is harassed and there's like an HR that comes in and has like rescues, and
Yeah.
this is very clear cut, like this is
I mean,
resolved because this is a problem.
yeah, like if you come across a man beating up a woman in the streets and then you rescue that woman, you're not going to say that two of those people were maintaining a dysfunctional relationship. Like one was an actual victim, one was an actual rescuer that needed to happen and be removed. But if somebody is taking up that, like my ex was always taking the stance of the victim.
Hmm.
The victim to his girlfriend's whorish past. How could she do this to me before we met? How
Just
could
so also
I?
people know, like if you haven't heard this before, he would like get angry with her and ruminate over just the idea that she had exes or had
Hmm.
hooked up or dated people in the past. It
Yeah.
was as bananas as we're talking about. So
Hey, he's not a victim of circumstance, right? But he's taking up that stance, so then I had to comfort him and become the rescuer.
yeah.
And then I would
Yeah.
get sick of that and then be like, fuck you. And now I'm the
Mm-hmm.
persecutor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instead of saying, you know what, I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to rescue you from these feelings of victimhood
Yeah.
because I had sex before you.
Yeah. I wonder if it's not as cleanly in the triangle like three people. I think that just seems to be maybe more common or anecdotal. Um, and this is all what we're talking about is all different roles involving maintaining a toxic dynamic, which is
Hmm.
like almost like maintaining pain,
Hmm.
right? It's of course every situation. I mean, this is why the drama triangle was talk about like drama starts with these three, but like at the end of the fairy tale, everything's fine, right? Like it gets
Yeah.
resolved, like, Cinderella becomes a princess, whatever. But when we're talking about in family systems therapy or like the drama triangle, it's like it is ongoing. It's a system of avoiding resolving pain and keeping it alive
Hmm.
with three people involved and playing a role in that. And when
Right.
one person is done with that role, they switch to the other ones. But the roles are the things that are stable.
Hmm. Wait, no, but the roles shift.
The
But you're
roles are
saying so they
stable, but the
shift, but the
people
fact that
in the
they're in the
roles are
roles.
different. Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What role are you most comfortable in? What do you think?
Rescuer, I guess. I mean, I don't, I don't think I sometimes criticize people behind their backs,
Hmm.
but I feel like that's kind of normal. I mean, it's usually like when I get fed up, like when I perceive them as being victim or perpetrator, then I'll be like, "Rah, they're perpetuating their own problems." But I don't know. I mean, I have an allergy to being a victim, but certainly,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I am the victim when it comes to more instrumental stuff. Like, um, I have the opposite of apparent competence when I need to
Yeah.
set up a tent or analyze data. And then I'm the damsel in
Yeah.
distress. Help
You
me.
are You were, yeah, you were, you play victim a lot. Like you're like, oh my God, I can't do this analysis. And then I sit next to you and you're like, okay, I do this and this and then I'm like, you knew how to do it. Like you just didn't think so, or you didn't want to do it. You want to make someone else do it. I'm so helpless. I had a friend who I couldn't believe, like I never did this before, and I was like, wow, the balls, the female labia to do this. Like she said that she was a little girl and she would have suitcases, and when she was traveling she would stand on the bottom or the top of this staircase and just look at the staircase with like a confused and scared look and do that until someone would carry her stuff down. She was like, that was just the way I did it. I would just stand there and I just kind of like look worried at the stairs until someone like, carried her suitcases. That's what you do with data analysis.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because data analysis makes me panic.
Yeah, I'm publicly outing you. You actually can do more of this stuff. So anyone out there who thinks that Jacqueline's a victim, but however, you are allergic to the victim role because there's a lot about your experience where like you will like contort your mind to justifying things to avoid the victim role. Like if
Hmm.
someone was like actively mean to you or like in your relationship or otherwise, you would be like, well, that makes sense. I understand why he would do that. I mean, I definitely triggered him in this way, and almost to the point where sometimes you will like pretend that you're like this evil, like Machiavellian, like, well, this, I did this and that. I'm like, no, that's just like your way of thinking that you had way more power and control than you did. So
Yeah, I mean, that's why I told everyone I was a
switch
narcissist for
roles.
like 5 years.
Yeah.
But I mean, the most like, I mean, I ended that relationship and like the friendship, and the most prominent emotion I had was guilt. So that's the rescuer's
Right.
emotion.
Right. I think that in both of those scenarios, you don't say like that was really hurtful. Like even things
Hmm.
like sometimes like your family members will say something and like your sister will say something mean to you or like your ex relationship, and you would get angry, kind of like how I would get angry, like how dare you, like why does he think this, blah blah blah, but you wouldn't be like that really hurt and actually I'm kind of scared.
Hmm.
You'd be like, well, it's because I did have a sordid past, and I'm like, oh my God, okay, like
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's good that I've found another rescuer to date so that I don't have to take up that role all the time.
well, even beyond that, there's not as obvious dysfunction, at least not that
Yeah.
so it's not like, you know, everyone could be free to be hurt sometimes and hurt someone else, and it's not something like you and your current partner like kind of toss around the soccer ball of pain. It's
Right.
like, things seem to happen and resolve, and a, a really interesting example I just thought of a drama triangle is the white. How far are you in the White Lotus in the
I
third
finished it.
season?
I
Okay,
finished it. Yeah.
the three women,
Uh-huh.
like three girlfriends.
They
This is
kept
why
shifting
like
roles.
friends of three are tough because like they shit talk each other when the other one is away,
Yeah.
right? And then they shift around to who is hurt, who is the one who's the bad one, who like,
Hmm.
and they all were kind of at fault at that. Like you
Yeah.
have the girl with short hair who's just like, oh, like
Lori?
I'm just trying
Oh,
to,
oh,
yeah,
her.
I forgot the names, but oh, I'm just trying to help. But then she was like really causing some like drama, and you could see in that whole season like they were just cycling through drama. It wasn't like they had a problem. One was a victim, one's a perpetrator, and everyone was like resolved it. It was a passed around pain. And
Yeah.
at the end, I think they just kind of, I don't want to give it away, but I think they were like this is what binds us, right? Like with they kind of they all kind of like did the right thing, and this is the tip to get rid of the drama triangle. You like communicate openly and actually address the pain. But I
Hmm.
think that they were a little bit, you could be like, they were like Yeah, that like we are close because we could shit talk each other, and this is how our friendship goes.
Yeah, but I also Lori subverted her role. You know, she decided to say out loud, like, I feel like a victim sometimes,
Hmm.
but really I'm lucky to have you,
Hmm.
and I'm not gonna lead into envy and persecution, right? I'm gonna say, I'm glad you have such a beautiful face. I'm glad you have such a beautiful family. You know, I'm not gonna take up the role that I usually take up
Yeah,
when I feel victimized.
yeah. So that's another. I guess that's another tip is like if you notice yourself. I guess it's all like. I guess it is stepping out of roles in general. I think that when we talk about dysfunctional families and the roles you play, the problem is you just completely becoming a role, right?
Hmm.
Instead of being individuals with everyone having their freedom and autonomy and agency, um, it's like there has to be a victim
Hmm.
where they never admit fault. They're the ones who are completely helpless and they're
Right.
being hurt by other people, right? I feel like that's like the blaming one, but
This episode is coming out after this is recorded, but I think taking a we care frame is also helpful. So basically, like understanding that your role may have to change in order to do the best thing for the group, right? That's what Lori did in that moment. She's like, I'm going to I'm going to let myself be hurt and powerless to an
mhm,
extent, and I'm going to do opposite action. I'm going to lean into love these people, and that's
mhm,
how we strengthen these relationships, and therefore then strengthen myself.
mhm,
Um, Another person might have to say, like, I'm going to lean out of the rescuer role because if
mhm,
I keep doing this, I'm going to flip to persecutor. I'm going to get
mhm,
resentful and exhausted and fed up. And
mhm.
so it sucks to not rescue, it sucks to deny help, but if I don't, then this person will cease to have my help forever.
Yeah. And like to recognize that stepping out of those roles, it's really scary because I think that when you talk about family systems, like the worst thing that you could imagine, especially a child, the worst thing you can imagine is the destruction of the family, right? If I don't mediate between mommy and daddy, my family is going to be destroyed, right? That's a
Hmm.
lot for like one person to hold. So they're going to maintain the dysfunction just because staying together in pain is worse than like breaking up, right?
Yeah.
And I can imagine how hard that would be to lean out of like the rescuer role. It's kind of like when we have patients who are in that kind of like victim active passivity. They go, I'm totally helpless, I can't do anything, and we have the tendency to be like, oh come on, here's this other tool, here's this other, like, do you
I
want help?
massively overfunction for my patients sometimes,
And
and I'm
yeah,
like having to learn how to not do that.
yeah. Oh, that's totally normal. That's like that's the roles that you're set up with. I'm literally rescue. I'm literally helping you. But
Yeah.
if the person like is completely denying any sorts of agency and saying, "Well, you're the whatever, you know, and I can't do anything," then it's gonna pull a lot of sympathy and support from you. But
Hmm.
when that happens, we're supposed to drop the rope, like lean out of the role a little bit, like, okay, I'm here if you need help. What
Hmm.
can you do? What are things that you're willing to do? All right, like stop working so hard and
Yeah.
let them, and because there's a system, right? They have to take up the mantle a little bit. They have to take up the agency and go, well, like, well, in order for us to stay connected, you're leaning out, so I have to lean back in a little bit. So,
It's funny, I'll notice it in myself when in session I'm like happy to overfunction. Like, yeah, let me help
mhm,
you. I'll come up with this. Blah, blah, blah. But then in supervision, I'll sound very frustrated about the patient.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, I've been told like it seems like you're doing too much work here. It seems like
yeah,
you're frustrated or annoyed. And I'm like, but
yeah.
I don't feel that way with them when I'm actually with them.
Hmm.
But
Well,
yeah,
because as we're saying, like, of course, you being in a helping role and them being a victim is like normal. But
right.
what's frustrating is that it doesn't lead to growth.
Right.
I think that's when you know there's a dysfunctional system, is when people don't have in that system the autonomy and freedom and agency to grow,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're stuck and you're arrested in the development. So it would be different if you were working, and then they go, wow, thank you so much. I took your advice. I listened to you. Like, you really helped me. Then you're
Yeah.
like, oh, great. Like, but it's frustrating when you're working, and you're feeling it's almost like you're chasing them. Yeah. Um, I think that the tips are, as we mentioned, like break the triangle,
Mm-hmm.
have people talk directly, either as a group, like the three people talk directly and openly about the pain and not avoid uncomfortable scenarios, and don't default to a role to avoid it, right? Like if you're talking about pain, don't be like, oh gosh, I'm the worst. I can't help anything, right? The kind of the collapse and shame and like falling into the victim role is a way to kind of avoid dealing with it. So
Mm-hmm.
actually just like talking about things directly, openly, try to not avoid discomfort. And then, as we're saying, like to not just fall into a role, but that we might have elements of a lot of different stuff, right? Sometimes we hurt people, sometimes we're hurt, sometimes we want to help, right? You could have all those things and you're not one thing. You're not
Yeah.
one of those things. Um, and just, I think that the main thing is to like recognize that in your life when you see a drama triangle, like maybe just reflect on like, huh, yeah, actually I have two friends that I'm always in the middle of, or, like I'm always fighting with my boyfriend, and this other friend always comes to step in and tell him off, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
notice when you have these triangles in your life, and notice if it's not leading to any change and growth. If it's just passing around that drama, then it's time to either just enjoy it and just enjoy the ride and know that that's something that's binding you guys, or to just lean out of it and just be like, okay, you guys figure it out on your own. You do it.
All right. Well, if you all want to lean into the role of rescuer, then we would love to have 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and lovely little comments to make us feel better about ourselves. But otherwise, we'll see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.